Well, hello there and welcome to this video. I'm so glad you're joining me because we're going to take a look at FileMaker. My name is Matt Petrowski, and in this video, what we're going to be looking at is linking records. And that's in our project that we're working on, which is a time tracking database. So stay tuned and we'll be on my desktop in just a few. All right, so the really cool thing about doing these live for me is that I dedicate a slot of time where I can basically talk about what we're talking about with regards to this whole series of FileMaker, but also answer your questions. Now, one of the individuals that actually logs in, I think, pretty much every day, and for those of you that aren't able to log in and watch this live, you can still post your questions in the comments. In fact, it's a great way to get the questions to me so that we can answer them. So here's the first question that came up. Hi, Matt. We're a bit daft. You're probably not daft. What exactly do you mean by the term multi-key field? And you know, getting things right when we talk about terminology is so important because then we have a common ground for communication. Could you kindly illustrate an example on today's 1026, happens to be today, live? We'll probably know this concept by another name such as multi-criteria or multi-predicate. Now that right there, we know it by multi-criteria or multi-predicate. That's one of the shortcomings of pretty much any computer language that we're learning or anything where we aren't familiar or the industry itself doesn't decide on a standard convention. You've got somebody over here that will promote it being named something like this, and then over here another person will promote it named something like this. FileMaker, the developer community, doesn't really have like a standards board where they say, okay, if you're going to say multi-key, you mean this. Oh wait, you mean multi-predicate. So that's just one of the downsides of FileMaker. Now to follow this up, his next comment was this right here. To piggyback on our question posted below, we believe you had said that regarding ID match trigger fields, which that in itself is almost three different things. Let's call them match fields, because when we're talking about key or match fields, and they happen to be what the key fields store are IDs. We're going to take a look at this. One cannot use fields which are not indexed. That's not true. You can use a field that is non-indexed, but only on one side of a relationship. You can't do it on both sides because you wouldn't be able to look anything up. You have to have an index on one side of a relationship. We'll see that. And this includes unstored calcs and global fields. Yes, you can use unstored calcs, and yes, you can use global fields. Mind clarifying, and I don't at all. In fact, let's take a look at that. We're going to switch over to FileMaker, and I've been using this particular database for quite a while. We looked at this. If you want to go back a few lessons and follow along, you'll find this, I believe, on lesson 8 or lesson 7. You'll find a link where you can download this file. Now, quite clearly in this file, what we have is a situation where we had people and we created a join table in order to join them to a particular set of events. Now, when we look at the defined database, what we have here is we very clearly have a connection that is based on an unstored, non-indexed field that is creating a relationship. That's the field that we created called unstored attendance. An unstored attendance is simply an unstored, calculated, multi-key field. So when I say multi-key, all I'm referring to is this fact right here. We don't just have one key in this field, we have multiple keys. Now, whether this field is actually a unstored calculated field, which in this case, this field is calculating based on the relationship that is right here. So we have a field right here. It is calculating its results based on this connection between these two table occurrences so that we can have the calculation here in order to create a new relationship right here. And that's all because we couldn't actually get the contents that we wanted from the events, from this table occurrence, which is one away, because the only record that people will see when looking this far away for the purpose of getting a value list is through the first record. And that doesn't represent all of the records that this person actually is attending. This person on the record that I'm on is attending 3. So in order to do that, we had to create the unstored calculated field. So let's do a quick little example here. Let's add a global field to the mix to this little database. I'll go into my fields, and here in people, we had created this field, unstored calculation. We're just going to create just any old generic global field. Now, one of the things that I do with key fields is I do tend to prefix them with the word key. Now, this is an arbitrary multi-key field, and I'm going to call it actually any key. And hopefully this will make sense. The type of the field has to be a text field, and this is the one type that allows you to have multiple keys within it and relate to any other given type of field. So a multi-key text field can relate to a number field, or a date field, or a time field, or a timestamp. Really, a text field is the only field that really wants you or lets you have multiple key values which are return separated. That's because the return is in the field. With a number, you can have returns, but really the number field just wants a pure number. That's it. It doesn't want to have the returns in there, although FileMaker will let you. Same with date and a time and a timestamp. All the rest of these want a singular value, whereas a text field can have multiple values, in particular multiple keys. So when we make this a text field and we create this, we have 2 different fields here. One is an unstored calculation. We can see that quite clearly right there. One is a global field. Well, not yet. I need to double click, choose my storage options, and make sure and choose to make this an actual global field. Once I do that, I can now create a relationship based on this value as well. In fact, let's do this. Let's create another table occurrence. Well, actually, I could have done that with attendees or anything, but let's go ahead. Let's do it for attendees. This is the good thing. I'll remove that. I'll move this down here. I'm going to take a duplicate of both of these table occurrences. Watch how nice this is. If I'm going to replicate a structure, there's no point in me doing them one at a time, selecting this one, dragging, and this one and dragging. I am now going to replicate this structure. Again, I don't like to expand these out necessarily to go hunt for the field, especially if you have a lot of fields. My trick is just drag and go. Drag and go, double click the relationship, then choose what you want. So we're going to go from that global field where we've even called it any key. And I'm going all the way over to the event's ID. I'm going to change that, zoom out here, and now we've got basically a same type of relationship here where we've got a many to many, but this relationship is basically connected based on the data structure, meaning this person is going to attend a specific number of events. But this global field can have any key value that I want, even key values from other records that don't even belong to this particular person. It's one of the greatest powers that you have in FileMaker is the fact that a global field can store multiple key values, giving you full control over whatever you want to display in a portal at any time. And however you derive that data is completely up to you. You can use execute SQL. You can use a find with a script that goes and copies and pastes. You can use a calculation field that will actually use like the list function. It's really how you get most of your power in terms of displaying your user interface the way that you want. So now let's go take a look at the structure. We're going to need to put a new portal on our layout here. I know this is taking a little bit of time, but fortunately my lesson with regards to linking records isn't going to take too much time. All right, so I have just duplicated this portal by simply option dragging. I'm now going to double click and I'm going to reassign this to that duplicate that I had made. In other words, I don't want a portal from this table occurrence. I now want the portal to come from this table occurrence because it's based on a different relationship, in this case, based on the global key. So we reassign to the attendees 2 and we say OK. This field also, whenever you make a copy of something, that copy takes the fields. When I double click this field, I have to remember that, looking at Manage Database, even though I just made the switch so that the portal was now displaying from this table occurrence instead of this table occurrence, what was happening is FileMaker was still displaying a field from this table occurrence in this table. Doesn't make sense because it's not connected. Well, it is connected, but it's connected all the way around, which wouldn't make sense from the standpoint of the way that I structure my data. So I need to reassign the field in that portal copy to where the field actually needs to come from. So we do that by simply switching to the event number 2. And notice that FileMaker even keeps the same field selected. It knows that you just switched between the table occurrences in terms of where do you want this field to actually pull its data from. All right, so now we go into, well, there's one other thing we're going to need on the layout here, and that is, FileMaker fortunately threw it on the layout for us. I don't have that option turned off, but we will drag that right over here and put it directly underneath what it's actually affecting. All right, so we zoom out, we go save, and so what we have now is where this example is a calculated field that's calculated based on the actual data structure. This field is completely arbitrary and can take any key. What do we mean by that? Well, let's go take a look at our data. We want to see our developer tables. I'm going to use and show the attendees table. Open that up because that's where my keys are. And again, because this is completely a key-based join table currently, there's no other data, it's very difficult for me to reference these unless I know what the ID is in terms of who it belongs to, which is a pretty easy thing to look up. Right now, I know almost right off the bat that Bob is ID 1BF, not just because it's right here, but because he has 3 records and I can see that there's 3 of them. Let's make this a little bit longer so that it doesn't wrap like that. So there's 1, 2, and 3. And I can see that Matt only has 2 records right there. So let's combine the 2. Let's get the ID events from the 2 different people and put that into the actual field, just to prove the point that this any key field can literally take any key, and it is your power of FileMaker. I am going to take, remember the key field wants a list of IDs of events, not IDs of people. That's how the join is actually working. Always go back and reference your graph. So if I take this particular ID event for Matt and put it into any key, look at that. It's going to show up right there. In fact, it shows up 2 times. And why does it show up 2 times? Well, that's probably because I'm not on, E6 is one. I don't know. I'd have to figure out why it's showing up for 2. In this particular example I'm giving you, it doesn't make sense what I'm doing. So why I'm getting these random results is something I'd have to investigate. But let's put another key value in there and see what happens. Even more data populates. But you can see I have full control over this multi-key global field. So hopefully that's a concrete explanation of what I refer to as a multi-key. You can have a calculated multi-key, you can have a global multi-key, and you can also have a local multi-key. And what would a local multi-key be? Well, it would simply be the exact same thing that we had set up right here of key, any key, but in the way that I name FileMaker fields, this would simply stop being a global field by unchecking this and say OK and say OK, and I would rename this from key any key uppercase to any key lowercase and change that. And so now what I have is on a record by record basis, that portal can display something completely different on each and every record. So those are the 3 different types of multi-keys that you can have. Calculated, global, which means it's going to be different for every user that's logged in, and then a local multi-key is going to be different for every record, but the same for every user who's logged in. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but hopefully once you start to play with this, you'll see that out of those 3 options, you get to control what you display to users. Do you want all users to see the same data when they land on this record? And if one user makes a change to that data and you want all other users to see that change reflected, well, then you're going to use a regular local multi-key. Do you want each user to be able to arbitrarily control what they see in the portal and no other users see this, see that same thing but see something different? then you're going to use a global multi-key where you control via a script what goes into that field. Then finally, do you want all users to always see the same thing all the time, no matter what? You're probably going to use a calculated multi-key. All right, hopefully that was a great explanation of what happens. You can see that that went away right there. In fact, if I wanted to take this key for Bob and show this one value, switch to the record for Matt, and just see one value, again, basically what we've done is we've created a relationship filter where if I had only wanted to see DevCon 2019, and again, I went through this in a previous video, I would be able to put a filter on the portal itself. But if I want to explicitly control and only load smaller amounts of data, then using a relationship filter, which this is what it is, using a local multi-key, I can do that. Alrighty, so hopefully that's a good explanation. Chewed up half of today's lesson, but that's all right. The stuff we're going to get to doesn't take a full 30 minutes. All right, so we've hidden that, and we can take a look at the time tracker, which was what we are working on. Let's open up the time billing that FileMaker had and the file. In fact, the link is in the description. If you want to follow along, you don't want to take the time to... not technique shell, where is it? I need to open it. Open my recent and go to my time track right there. Now mine's going to come up with admin. The file that you download that's in the link in the description, that I've made it so that it opens without the password. Yesterday's lesson, we took a look at everything that I do to put in all of the things necessary for the startup of a file. So when it comes to this time tracking database, as I've mentioned in the data planning section, I basically like to think about how flexible can I make my data? How can I make it so that anything that I want to get out of this data, I can be able to extract that? And that usually boils down to breaking down the data and storing only the smallest unit possible, instead of storing things in the way that I think I should. Now, the way that you might think you should, as I discussed in the data planning, is I'm going to create a record, and that record is going to contain my start time and my end time. But I know from experience that is a little bit, it's not as flexible as storing all of the atomic pieces of data, which is just the time itself. So what I now need to do is I need to link two pieces of data together. And what are those two? Well, one would be a start time and one would be an end time. And fortunately, it's very easy to do that with any piece of data. If you have data split across multiple records, all you have to do is have something that ties them together. And typically that's a key value. So in this scenario, my thought process is, what's the key value? Well, for a time tracking database, I am only ever working at any given point in time for a span of time on a given project, or I should if I want to track it properly. It's not like I'm going to click start. I want to track time for 15 minutes, and within that 15 minutes, I'm going to work on 3 different projects. That obviously blows everything out the window. So we need to track the time. Now, here's a good lesson that I've learned over my years with FileMaker. Sometimes the data that you already have in the database is the data that you actually need. And what you're thinking about that you think you need to add additionally, you really don't need to add. In fact, just a couple videos ago when I started taking a look at this time tracker and trying to break down what I did, again, this is such a simple database and it's so easy to confuse yourself later on down the road if you don't do good documentation. I was trying to find out, okay, this is the duration right here, but where am I actually tracking the time? And once I thought about it and I looked at the database, I came to the same conclusion. In the database that we have created, we have our tables, and one of those is the time table, where we're tracking our time. And I had to ask myself, I am creating a new record, and I'm creating a new record where that record captures the time upon that record is created. And the answer came to me simply said, do I actually need a time field if that is the same thing as the time that I start? And so I just decided to operate off of that data alone. I'm already making the field, when we look at the auto enter, well, I should be turning this on right here, turning on prohibit modification. So that means from the time that I'm going to click the start button, which is going to create a new record, that new record is already going to have a timestamp on it. Do I need to add the extra timestamp? And the answer for me was no. I don't need that. So I'm not allowing myself to actually change that timestamp by turning on that prohibit modification. And all I need to do is actually put in a start time or a start button. So you can see that right over here in the master, in the example that I'm using, I have a start time and it's going to be so simple. We go into layout mode and we choose our little button tool and we simply just drag out a button and we simply call it start. Now this is how I'd start most all of my scripts. Most of my scripts when I'm working in FileMaker, I try to use FileMaker's native behaviors first, then if it warrants it, then create a script. And it's really easy to do this here in FileMaker 16, is I can create a single step at this stage. A little tight there. Let's zoom in but zoom out. Down at the bottom of when you select a, going crazy here with my zooms, when you create a new step, if that single step isn't going to accommodate you, you can always click Convert to Script, and it will create a new script for you rather than going the other way around, and that is actually creating the new script. Because I already know that in any FileMaker database, I'm going to end up having a lot of scripts. So if I can try to solve it with a single step, I do. For some of you, maybe just creating the script right off the bat is the way that you go, and as long as you have good organization, no problem with that. So I'm going to type in new record here. And I've got the new record request. And so that's really all that I needed for a start time. Now, of course, I need to show the data that I want to use. And there's one thing that I'm doing incorrectly right here. I notice, do you notice it too? I've got it highlighted, actually. I'm working with my time database or my time table, but I'm actually on my startup because my startup is defaulting to the startup layout. That's the super fast startup that we took a look at in the previous lesson. So let's fix that. I know that for this particular database, I don't have multiple users yet. I'm not choosing a direction of a particular role of user over another. So I need to go in and modify my startup script. I'm going to open up my scripts with Command-Shift-S. I had created these yesterday in the startup, and I'm simply going to put in here a go to layout. So I hit a return, and I'm typing in go to layout. What layout do I want to go to? Well, I want to go to the time layout because that's the one that I want to start up on. So startup is really fast. It loads. There's no records. It's super quick. Now I can use my script, which is going to be my branching decisions of where I want to go. So double clicking the time layout is going to make sure that when I start this file the next time, it's going to go to the proper layout. So I'll close the script workspace and I'm going to cut this from this layout. I'm now going to switch to the time layout, which is going to look the same. I don't want to save that. I'm always giving myself a new preference here. Here's a thing about working in layout mode. When you copy from one layout to another in FileMaker, FileMaker does its best to attempt to paste something in the same location from where you had copied it. It's not always precise or perfect, but there's a trick. If you want to paste something somewhere else, just make a preliminary click just before you actually paste. So if I want this button to show up right here where my cursor is, I'm going to click, doesn't do anything, but now I'm going to paste, and notice that the button will center. It pasted it right in the center of where that cursor is. So it's a really helpful thing if you just make the preliminary click because you want to put something somewhere else when you've copied or cut and go to another layout. It's really pretty helpful. Of course, now I'm going to drag it over here as I zoom out and put it right there. Now, clearly, I am going to be emulating what I have already over here. You're never stuck to any particular view of data within FileMaker. You can always, always, always design a view that will accommodate the way that you want users to see data. That's one thing I've learned about FileMaker. So don't think of FileMaker's views as a constraint to how you should structure your data. Structure your data properly, then design your views around that. So the creation timestamp, I'm going to get rid of pretty much everything here. Well, I'll leave the IDs on screen because we're learning FileMaker. We want to be able to see those. So I'll leave the ID on screen, and now I'm going to put the creation toast timestamp because that's what I decided. It's already got the timestamp. Is there really anything else that I need? No. And I'm going to shrink up my layout part. Now here's a little tip. If you are developing things that you want to be cross-platform, or something that's ultimately going to work on an iPad and on a desktop, I like to go hybrid. FileMaker, you'll see that in a lot of their solutions, as we open up their script, actually, let's go open up their layouts over here. One of the things that FileMaker does, and it's a little bit of an annoyance to me, actually it's not too bad in this particular task database. FileMaker explicitly creates desktop versions and iPad versions. I don't like to do that myself. I do everything possible in order to make a hybrid layout that will work for iPad but will scale up for desktop, because I really only want to have to make one. And a lot of FileMaker examples, they will have a desktop, an iPad, and an iPhone layout, and that's managing 3 different layouts in order to convey the same type of user interface. If you can get away with that, I suggest doing it. And the tip is this: the width, the maximum, well, let's actually use the little features that FileMaker has right here. FileMaker, when you're in layout mode, has these options. Now, the one thing to recognize is FileMaker quickly becomes outdated, because FileMaker, when they first put these in, they put them in when the devices were these scales, iPhone 320 by 460. That's not the case anymore. iPhones now can go 320 by taller, and iPads. When the iPad Pro came out, a max width of 768 really no longer applied, because on an iPad Pro, when you split screen, the split screen actually takes some of the bar in between, and it ended up being like 729 now is the smaller amount. And FileMaker really only gives us one custom size. I wish FileMaker, if they were going to implement these types of features, would implement them in the way that we could selectively choose as a developer to add as many custom sizes as we want, add them to the preference file, and then all of our saved custom preferences are there. And then they don't have to worry about keeping up to date with all of the different modern versions. Just bake it in so that the program does that. But FileMaker does that for some reason. So using this little option, we can show the iPad that FileMaker has on here, and then we can also show the iPad in landscape, which 660 is the smaller of the two. So if you are doing a hybrid design, it is the intersection of these two that we see right here, where that's the design that you would want to limit your layout to. So I would drag this to this width, which is currently set to 10, and here in the layout, I don't know if you know this, but I don't like to work in inches and I don't like to work in centimeters when I'm designing for the user interface. If you click the measurement system in FileMaker, click it here, or if you click it in the ruler, let's show the ruler because we're here to learn FileMaker, we will go to the View Rulers. We can see that the measurement system is displayed here as well. It doesn't matter whether I click here or whether I click in the inspector, it will rotate through the 3 different systems that FileMaker has. We can see that inches, centimeters, and points. So if you set it to points, then you're going to be working in the pixel mode, is what I call it. It's not official, but you can see that I could have done that right here as well. So that's a much more precise, easy way to work, but we'll find out when we talk about in FileMaker's layout mode that it is also possible to have decimal values in point mode, and typically we want to have whole values. So when we have a layout part selected, in other words, if I do not have anything selected, I just clicked in the bottom part of this layout, as I click and drag this, you can see that the width does actually display an update right here. But sometimes it doesn't, I don't know. So I've gotten into the habit of actually selecting that and then dragging to the actual precise placement right here of the 768. We can also see the tooltip right there that it's actually showing as I drag. And then I would never want to go past this point right here if I was doing a hybrid layout. So that was a long little sidebar there, wasn't it? But I think you're here to learn FileMaker, and hopefully that taught you something. All right, so let's get these linked up with our button. So our start, we know, is going to create a new record. That new record is going to have a common value across the records. The common value typically is going to be the project that you're working on. So let's go into Define Database. Here in our time table, we need that one common value. That common value we know is going to come from a project that we are working on. All right, I said database, but that's how I think. I think of, I work on database projects, so excuse me, a project. So I'm going to have a foreign key, which is going to relate to that project table. I already have the project table right here, but I don't know that I duplicated it. So I do have the primary key right here in the project table. So let's just make our foreign key. Foreign keys for me are always named ID because it's a key value and it's a foreign key to the project table. And I create that right there. So that's going to be the common thing that links the two together. Now, currently, when I create a new record, nothing is going to populate this key value, but let's link two records together right now just for the fun of it. We'll go into browse mode, and I do need to switch to my view as so that I can view as a list view. In fact, one of the things that FileMaker does, I talked about this in a previous video, is FileMaker enables all views on all layouts. I don't like that because typically when I'm designing a view, it's for a specific type of view, form, list, almost never table, unless it's something that I know that the person needs table view. Let's go fix that. We go into layout mode with Command or Control L. We choose on our layout setup. And then once we're here, we're going to go to the views area and we are going to limit this particular layout to only displaying list view. That means I'm going to turn off form view and table view because I don't want the user to be able to switch into them. Users can easily get confused, and if I have a layout designed to be viewed in list view, why would I ever want to allow them to go to form view? FileMaker wants to be nice and leave those options checked on. I don't like it. All right, so browse mode. Let's link these two records in common and fix this up. So we've got two records now. And I need an ID field. For me, I'm working in FileMaker Advanced. What's the easiest way to go grab an ID value that I can use in order to link these two? Well, there's two ways that I could do this. Because I only have two records, I can borrow a UUID from doing a replace or anything that allows me to access the calculation dialog box. For me, the easiest thing is using a copy of FileMaker Advanced. I can just simply open the data viewer, just create a new watch variable by clicking on watch, clicking that variable, and then just put in get UUID. With this sitting in the data viewer, I can just grab that variable at any point in time. Notice that every time that I come in and out of this, the value will change because the calculation is constantly refreshed. Notice that when I even move between current, it's 8013, and I come back over, and it's now C9. It is constantly absolutely unique. That's the power of get UUID. So for me, it doesn't really matter at this point in time. I will take this one, 1097, click monitor and hide my data viewer, and I will now link them together. All right, so we have two values that are linked together that are going to represent a start time and an end time. How do I distinguish between which one is which? Well, that just dictates that I add another field. I know that this is a start time. I can see that it's 11:38:03, and I can see that this is 11:38:16. Now, let's put in a timestamp that's a little bit later, so we're going to have a better duration, so that when we cover that tomorrow, we'll be able to actually do that. Here is a shortcut. In fact, let's go to the Insert menu. And notice that we have these insert options right here of current date, current time, current username, where we've got command dash, command, a colon. These become pretty useful when you're working in FileMaker and you want to just get some type of date value in. Now, I don't know why they are, actually, I do know why they are not available right now. Hopefully you do too. Here's a good time for a little quiz. Why are these not accessible on my creation timestamp? Give you a few minutes. Because prohibit data entry is turned on, and that's why. This would be able to be overridden by a script if I wanted to, but currently I'm not going to be able to make a change in the user interface as a user of this field because of that option of prohibit modification. So if I want to, I've got two ways to solve this. I can go to the creation timestamp, temporarily uncheck just because I want to get that in there, and I'm lazy. I go back here, go to the insert menu, and voila, they are now active. But they are good to know when you're creating your test data, because if I want a new timestamp in here, I can just go command minus will give me just the date, or command semicolon will give me a full timestamp, giving me a difference between 11:38:03 and 11:30:25. Why is that one? Holy cow, why is this AM? Oh, because it is AM. I don't know what I'm thinking about right there. All right, but we'll be able to do our time difference. Let's actually get that one in there and get that a later timestamp. There we go, 34. And I should have just made this one 30. All right, what we're ultimately trying to do is I had these records probably in reverse order. 30 and then 34. We know that they're going to be, one is later than the other, so perfect. We could go put on the prohibit, which we'll do later time, but right now we need to distinguish between these. Well, for me, it came down to this. One of them is a start time and one of them is a stop time. Or one of them, for me, the way that I have it in my database, one of them opens the session and another one closes the session of time that I'm working. So basically what I did is I decided to put in the, I forget what I called it. I could go over to the database, but I'm running low on time, so I'm just going to call it status right now because I can actually change that if I want to. Now remember, when we're coding in FileMaker, I am thinking in terms of the status of the, actually let's call it type. That makes a little bit more sense. The type of the time stamp that I'm tracking. The type is either an open or a close. Now I'm thinking in terms of the word, but as a programmer or as a developer, I have a distinct difference between only two options. And anytime you only have two options, open or close. Now later on down the road, I may do, pause or a different type, but currently right now there's really only two. And in fact, I'll probably tell myself I'm going to limit myself to a record can only either represent an open or a close, or a start or a finish. That dictates a Boolean value. So I am not going to make this a text field, and I'm not going to use the word open. I'm not going to use the word closed. I'm not going to use the word start or finish. I'm going to use a number field, and I'm now going to decide a 1 equals open or a 0 equals open. And in fact, I'm going to choose a 0 equals open and a 1 equals closed. Because most of the time in the rest of the programming world, we start with 0-based things. In FileMaker, it does a lot of things based on 1. So at this time, I'm going to take the opportunity to put a note here of what this field is or what it's going to represent or what my settings are. So I'll even put 0 equals start and then comma or slash or whatever you want to put, 1 equals end. And for me, I don't know why this is the case, but for me, I open my session and then I close my session. And so that little note right there is going to let me know what I'm actually doing. I can toggle between this, and so now I get a very clear picture with the comment. When I'm looking at the rest of my database, these are the enumerative values that represent things in this field. And of course, you could have a 2 equals, a 3 equals, a 4 equals, and so on. But storing this number in a database that grows really large is down the road infinitely better than using the words open and close, which I think over in the other database I may be using open and close. But now I have the two different types, and so let's get these in. This is going to be right here an open, so that's going to be a 0, and this one is going to be a 1 right there, and that's going to be my close. So how did I manage dealing with the process of opening and closing these records? Well, this button right here of start is going to create a new record that captures a timestamp. What I want to do is I then want to have a close button so that when a particular start is available, I want to be able to close that and have that create a record. So watch how cool this is and how easy it is to do this. I'm going to simply option drag this and take a copy of this onto the same record. I'm going to double click and rename this button close. I'm not even going to change the fact that it's simply creating a new record, because I know when a new record is created, a timestamp is automatically captured, which means it's going to be a close event. But here's the trick. When do I want the close button to show? I only want the close button to actually show when the record type is actually an open. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to hide this button otherwise. So I'm going to go to this fourth area of the inspector where we can find the behavior option, and we can find the hide option when. So I've just decided that an open of my work session is a 0. I'm basically going to do this. I'm going to say hide this close button when, and I think this will work. This again is using Boolean logic, and if this is foreign to you as a new FileMaker learner, basically what I'm going to type in would be the same thing to what we ultimately want. We would basically say hide this when, if this was not a number field, type, and there's many ways to do not equals in FileMaker. You can do the not equal sign, which is basically holding down the option key. It's the little value right here that I could click this, but I'm so used to typing on the keyboard. Option equals does the inverse, or the not equals. But one of the things that some developers in FileMaker don't know about, you can do this too, which is a little bit odd, but that right there will also work for not equals, which in some other languages is not equals. So let's go ahead and put that there and just see if FileMaker accepts it to see if I'm right. It's been a long time since I've used that, but this is what you might be thinking. I want to hide this button when it does not equal. It's hard for me to communicate and discuss things and also think about my logic right here, but I'll put this and we'll just see what happens. It does accept it, and we'll go into browse mode and see what happens. It doesn't show right there. Let's say, oh, well, that's because the logic is wrong. I was giving you the example logic, my fault. So the actual logic that we want here, because I was telling you, don't do this in your database, you would basically just turn it into a Boolean logic. So let's do this. So either if a 0 equals false, and zeros represent my open database, I think this might be right. I don't know. Let's take a look. No, I want it the other way around. So I just want it, I want to take off the not that I put right there. So right there, it's already false. Hide this object when false, and a start record is by itself when I created it according to Boolean logic because it's 0, false. So there we go. So that's the start of our database. That's how simple it ends up being. When I click start, a new start record is actually created. Now again, I can do anything in this user interface that I want to do. If when I click the start button, I only want to see that one record, I can write a script and attach it to this button now and get rid of all other records in this list view. I can do it within form view. I can do it however I want the user to see the data. I can definitely do it. But now that I've created this start record, it's going to show the close button, and we can see that the type was not actually added by default. So let's go ahead and add it. Every time that a new record is actually created, let's go make it default to a start type of record. How do we do that? We go into our defined database. We go to our type field. We double click. And of course, this, as I mentioned, putting this 0 is the cheap and easy way, but it is exactly the same thing as doing this right here. Both of those, as far as I'm aware, are pretty much exactly the same. And you see that we have this do not replace. But we're not worried about the do not replace in this particular case because we know that on the close button, what we're going to do is we're actually going to have to write a script. And I'm going to let you write that one because I'm going to wrap today up. So let's go ahead and get rid of this record and see what happens when we click our start. Yep, we've got a new start. It's defaulted to the start type of record. The script that I now need to attach to my close is I need to create a new record and explicitly set this to a 1 of a close event. And then all I'm going to have to do is calculate the duration between these two items, but we're going to have to link up our project database, and that's what we're going to end up doing tomorrow. All right, so went a little long today, 43 minutes. Let's see if we've got any questions that came in, because I just went on and on, hopefully about a lot of content that helps you out with regards to thinking about how you are dealing with your database. Our big takeaway for today was sometimes the data is already there. And if the data is already there and we can just think about how we can wrap the interface around the data, then we can make a much more efficient FileMaker database. Also with our enumerations and are using our Booleans, rather than storing the words, we want to store an enumeration or a Boolean value. And then we'll just figure out how in the user interface to actually display that. There's always a way to display data if you're storing it as numbers and you want to have the text data. All right, so let's head over to those questions. Let's see, flip over here and show the questions, see if we had anything that came in. with our questions. We've got all of our good mornings, hellos. All right, is it possible to go to a field by calculation? Yes, it certainly is possible to go to a field by calculation. Because I'm running long today, I'll have to save that one for maybe tomorrow, but you can name, this is my tip that I will give you. You can name a field or name any object in a FileMaker layout by simply doing this. With this object selected, and it doesn't matter whether it's a text block, whether it's a rectangle, any object in all of FileMaker, I believe any object, yep, rectangle too, can have an object name, which we have right here. So if you give that object a name, take a look at FileMaker's go to object. I think that's just what it's called. That's how you're able to target going to a field, even if that field is a calculation field. You can go to any object that you want in FileMaker. So good question, and hopefully a good tip. All right, heading back over to our questions right here. About why is it saying AM? That's because it is AM for me, Pacific time, as I shoot these video. Hola, muchachos. Hola, Antonio. Estoy aprendiendo español. Currently, actually. All right, sorry, internet problems, and can you illustrate multi-key calc? Yes, we had a multi-key calc HBH group in our original file. We'll take a quick look at that. Switch quickly to our relationships file that we had. This is a multi-key calculation. Because it's an unstored calculation, that means it's constantly going to be fresh as opposed to stored. Remember, a stored calculation in FileMaker is only ever going to update if any of the fields that particular calculation references changes. So a stored calculation is not going to be the most current data unless something modifies that's referenced and updates that calculation. Otherwise, an unstored calculation is always going to be the proper logic, because as soon as FileMaker displays this user interface, or we move from one record to another record, FileMaker is obliged to actually update this calculation because it's unstored, meaning it has to go do all the computations that whatever the calculation says it needs to do. That's also why unstored, or a lot of unstored calculations on your user interface, can start to slow your database down. So you try to think about ways to actually avoid those unstored calculations, and that's what we're going to see when we add the duration field tomorrow. Quite simply, we're going to add it as an auto-enter field instead of an unstored calculation, which is typically what new FileMaker learners will do. They just create a calculation because they know, oh, I need to calculate something, and it's going to be calculated. But we know now, from looking at my previous lessons, that we can avoid that, because anywhere where we have access to FileMaker's calculation engine, that's where we can avoid creating an unstored calculation by making it, say, for example, an auto-enter calculated field instead of unstored. All right. So let's see if there were any more questions before we wrap for today. Nope, no questions for today. All right, so hopefully this has helped you out with regards to learning more about FileMaker Pro. As I wind up the music here, I want to make a suggestion. If you're interested in learning more about FileMaker, let me show you something really quickly here. I am just about to release a new little file, and that is on the magazine website. So if you're interested in cool things like this, check this out. I've got this record right here, and it's got 8,790 records, and it's a hypothetical situation where we've got a pharmaceutical database. They need to replace all kinds of data. I click assign dates, up comes this little pop-up, and I've got a little progress bar that it has actually telling the user, here's how it's going to do. If you like learning this type of stuff, head over to FileMakerMagazine.com. Very inexpensive in terms of what you get. You get to copy the code, take it, use it in your own database, learn more about scripting, and that's where I do all of my advanced lessons. So that's going to leave this video with a wrap. I'm going to switch you to the subscribe. You can subscribe right here if you want to be notified via YouTube. Otherwise, sign up over on the magazine website, and the next video in this series will probably come up right here. All right, hope you enjoyed learning, and until next time, happy file making, and see you later.